So let's get into this real quick. So here's the thing. Unfortunately, in the business of Social Security law, we will see from time to time shocking and absolutely upsetting news. This news comes in many forms, but the really, really terrible stuff tends to come in the form that a Social Security recipient either passes away naturally or not naturally and ends up somewhere in a room or a basement. Let's get into this real quick, specifically from the hot sheets, talking about those individuals who are recipients being arrested. This was released on April 17th, 2025. Bottom line, let's get into it. Rochester woman pleads guilty to defrauding Social Security. All right, attorney Michael DiGiacomo announced today that Wendy Stone, 63, of Rochester, New York, pleaded guilty before U.S. District Judge Frank G. Garcia Jr. to conversion and unlawful conveyance of government money, which carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison and $250,000 fine. Okay, so just to be clear, this horrendous thing that she did, absolutely horrible, doesn't really have that negative of a prison sentence. I mean, yeah, if you're 63, 10 years in prison, that's epic horrible. But at the same time, for what she did, you know what I mean? So, all right, let's get into it real quick. Assistant U.S. Attorney Nicholas A. Testani, who is handling the case, stated that in December 2022, victim one was a recipient of benefits under the Supplemental Security Income Program. So we got a victim, they were an SSI person, something happened to him. Okay. On December 28th, 2022, okay, so a couple of years ago, victim one died at a residence in Rochester. Stone, right, our 63-year-old Wendy Stone, she discovered victim one's body days after victim one died. Okay, so we've got an SSI person. They pass away in their home in Rochester. Wendy Stone, our 63-year-old, she does something. She was also aware that victim one collected SSI program benefits, but rather than inform authorities of victim one's death, Stone took victim one's debit card and spent SSI program money still being deposited into victim one's account for her own benefit. In furtherance of this scheme, Stone used victim one's Social Security number to activate a new debit card in the name of victim one in order to conceal victim one's death and continue receiving victim one's SSI program benefits. Now, here's where it gets bad. Because you get a lot of people, like their parents will pass away and they still collect the retirement check. You get a lot of people where, they play games like this, yada, yada. And literally, we've had cases where they find SSI people locked up in a basement with a pail that they have to, basically urinate in. And it's very scary. It's very terrible. And it's one of those things where they're held hostage. In this instance, Stone used victim one's Social Security number to activate a new debit card. In order to do that, she also moved victim one's corpse into the basement of the residence victim one died in. She wrapped victim one's corpse in plastic, placed it in a recycling bin, and periodically poured bleach on it. Victim one's corpse remained in the basement from December 2022 to September 2023. Okay, so little bit under a year. Okay, between January 2023 and September 2023, Stone improperly collected $7,902 in SSA program benefits intended for victim one. So at the end of the day, she got around $8,000. She hid the dead body in the basement. She poured liquids on it to keep it basically stabilized down there as much as she could. And essentially, the problem is, at the end of the day, OIG, Office of Inspector General, will usually start asking questions about why are they not using their Medicaid? Why are they not using their Medicare? Well, that's because their body was wrapped as a corpse in plastic with periodic bleach being poured on it. On February 6, 2023, Stone recertified SNAP benefits. In her recertification, Stone stated that victim one still resided with her. As a result of this false information, Stone received an additional $1,072 in SNAP benefits that she was not entitled to receive. The plea is the result of an investigation by the Social Security Administration's Office of Inspector General under the direction of Special Agent in Charge Amy Connolly, who's got to be busy. She pops up a lot. And the Rochester Police Department under the direction of Chief David Smith. Sentencing is scheduled for July 17th, 2025 at 11:30 a.m. before Judge Garcia. All right. Here's what I usually see with these situations, and here's why it's absolutely horrible and terrible. I know Becky Meadows is like, "Oh my, yes, it's bad." The usual thing that happens with these types of situations, they're not common, but they're too common in my opinion. Okay? What usually happens is somebody will pass away. It's either due to, somebody wanting them to pass away unnaturally or they pass away naturally. This was a natural passing to some degree, and then the placement into the basement. But there are situations where people who are dealers of narcotics will gather up people who live in a house that are on SSI. They will place them in the basement and they will basically keep them there and then every month pull essentially from their debit card. And what they'll do is they'll have other people go who need to use and abuse drugs to the bank to pull the funds out specifically from those debit cards. And that's part of the gig of them getting drugs is that they pull out the full, $700, $800, $900 of SSI, or if it's larger SSDI or retirement benefits, it could be $2,000, it could be $2,500, it could be $3,000. Now, as a result of this, you will see different types of situations. Those individuals that are the most successful with getting away with this have many layers of people who have to go ahead and talk about what they did to link it back to the person who started the crime. Also, the people who tend to be more successful with this scam, with this fraud, tend to get rid of the body in some way. The classics are, of course, burying the body and then placing a plant on top of it that can't be removed, for endangered species purposes. Taking it to a farm where there's animals that will eat the bones and everything, which, you go into the pig market with that. Or basically, the classic thing that's more famous because of Mexico, South America, etc., is a 55-gallon drum and basically an acid bath that occurs. Now, when that happens, they don't have the person anymore. The person's gone. I've had claims where I could not get the claimant on the phone anymore. And the people that were supposedly taking care of that person, that veteran usually, are in places like South America, Mexico, etc. I don't see it as much from the Philippines, Thailand, stuff like that. I see it more from Mexico, South America, where they just keep collecting the check on behalf of the person. That I tend to see. Which, by the way, veterans, if you're looking for love, just please keep in mind, some of you do not do well in South America. Some of you do not do well in Mexico. And then what happens is, just to be aware, the SSA will set up what's called a CEME, consultative examination medical expert appointment, where you will then have to go to a doctor and be treated. And the first thing they do is they go ahead and make sure everything links up that the person, the male that shows up, is in fact the person that is supposed to be receiving the benefits. So everything from photos to prior diagnostic impressions, locations of tattoos, all that stuff is what they're checking. And Mexico, South America, quite often you will get somebody that's a close lookalike, but they're not a perfect match. And I've had issues with that, where the person will say, the most recent one was where somebody, I kept saying, look, I just have to talk to the claimant. Like, go ahead and get the claimant. Oh, like, he's not available. Okay, let's pick a day. Well, he's not available on that day. Oh, well, let's pick a month. Well, he's not available that month. Okay. And then we get to the point where it's like, when am I going to talk to this guy? We're 6 months down the line. I haven't talked with him. Oh, he's just not doing. Okay, well, the SSA is now setting up a basically a meet and greet, which is kind of like a sting to see if this person is truly alive. And then, I get one of these things back usually from them to say, and this is how I know, like, I don't take it beyond that step, but to me personally, this is how I know they're committing fraud. When I get a message back from them saying, we only want you to be able to communicate with us in writing going forward, that's when I know fraud, in my opinion, is occurring. Absolutely. Because, when they do that game, when they play that whole spiel, because, there's certain ADA protections and stuff like that. When they play that, I want to get as far away from that claim as quickly as possible, because usually you get OIG following up with them to go ahead and find out who, what, when, and where. All right, let's see what we got here. I see we got a $5 donation from government_username. There you go. Let me put a little, okay. If my mom hasn't been to her doctor and hasn't had medication prescribed in 6 years on SSI, not SSDI, can she be prosecuted or have to pay back SSA? No. You're not forced to use your Medicaid. You're not forced to use your, Medicare. You're not. You know what I mean? It's just, it looks really weird. Like if your mom is like, 72 and she's not getting medical treatment utilizing those insurance programs, then like something's up. You know what I mean? Like that's like there's a problem on the horizon. Something does not make sense. So what I would say kind of in this situation, just to clarify, is that, it's kind of like with the IRS. Even if you don't file taxes, you do want to file like a notification of change of address every once in a while, just to give them a heads up. It's like, this is where I'm at. This is what's going on. But at the same time, she hasn't had medical treatment and she's elderly. Like, that's going to ring some, bells, some flashing red lights kind of gigs. So you have to be very, very careful of that. Now, I want to add an additional note related to this because I think it's incredibly important. Another thing that I saw one time, which was absolutely horrific, and I've still not mentally digested it. I've had dreams about it and all kinds of stuff. I one time was basically it was a quasi double wide trailer. It was really like two singles that were slapped together. But the bottom line is, because, in some of these communities where they're impoverished people, they make a door, So the bottom line is I saw an individual who basically passed away and across the thingy. And what happened was I thought people were coming in medically to treat the person as they were passing away. It wasn't traditional medical. It was a group of individuals that when somebody passes away, they immediately go there and harvest the organs. This is another way in which SSI, SSDI beneficiaries unfortunately meet a negative outcome. I don't know how they link it up. I don't know what their business model is. I don't know any of that stuff. I don't know if they give people money up front that when they pass away, they can show up and grab the organs. I don't know if it's all just illegal the whole way through, from point to point. But another thing is, and that's why they're the fragile class, disabled, elderly, etc., retired. Unfortunately, when some of them pass away, there's a team that goes out and harvests the organs. But that obviously doesn't tend to happen to people who live in, let's just say, protected communities, good communities. You get places like Bithlo, you get places like Pine Hills in Florida. That's the kind of place where this stuff can happen. Okay, so with that said, I wanted to explain that this is unfortunately not uncommon enough. We wish it was happening less. It is not a good thing. There's one final thing I want to say about this type of crime that I normally see happening. Usually you will see a dealer who basically loans drugs to beneficiaries until they can't afford to pay them. Then, when they get to the point where they can't afford to pay for them, they go ahead and do a scheme to sell the house, right? And then have the proceeds paid to the dealer. Once the proceeds are then paid to the dealer, what happens is the dealer will usually go to Las Vegas or some other place, and you'll see it. They always kind of have similar, they have similar qualities to them, right? Similar tattoos, similar teeth, similar this, similar that, and all of a sudden they've got a stack of cash and they're in Las Vegas. When I see that, I almost always know what the scheme is and what the continuous repetitive thing is. They'll find somebody, they'll get them hooked on drugs. It'll usually be pain related. Okay, they get hooked on it. They can't pay their bill. They sell the house. Some other family gets the house. And the sale is like a legal one. It's set up through a real estate company. It's a legal sale. And then basically the dealer gets the funds. And so what's unfortunate about that I'm sure some of you are wondering as recipients, what happens to the people that used to live in that house? Well, a couple of things happen. They either become homeless and live in the woods. They become homeless and live on the streets. They become homeless and live in a homeless help facility. Or they go in with family, if they have any. Or, unfortunately, they are discarded. And that's the terrible, terrible part of this thing, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. So here's the thing. I get a lot of people screaming at me about how Elon is this and that and terrible, 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 terrible. And I get it. But that's usually from people who live in such a cutesy version of reality that they have no conceptual understanding about the level of fraud and crime occurring in this country and how bad it actually is. So when somebody tells me about, you know, how I need to be more compassionate with the Social Security program and they shouldn't be doing fraud reviews and crime reviews and this and that, you got to understand. I don't live in your bullshitty kind of like fluffy whatever parameter that you think is, you know what I mean, America. America has the same crime that South America does and the Middle East and the worst parts of Africa that have like the most violence. We have the exact same thing here. A lot of it, many of you never see because it doesn't show up on TV anymore. There are certain types of crimes that will only show up on Fox. There are certain types of crimes that will only show up on CNN. And there are certain types of crimes that won't show up on either channel. And I guess what's upsetting about that to me is that people expect America to have a higher valuation of life. And then when you attach onto that the valuation of life for a fragile individual, right? Somebody who can't work, somebody who's disabled, elderly, retired. What's bothersome about that situation is that at the end of the day, if we don't start following the money to fight fraud, if we don't start following the money to find out who's being trafficked, who's ending up in a vat, then unfortunately, it's just going to keep going and going and going. So when people tell me like this, this world, this reality of like, how could we, how would, look, I agree. Elon should have had somebody put on board that was a Democrat that was the face of DOGE with the other individuals there to go and review the whole situation to figure out what was going on. I agree. It should have, could have, would have been done better to be more the sharing of our two-party system. But to be fair, we are just now, days ago, we had the first one. We are just now seeing the actual legal cases, the articles, the prosecutions, the arrests of people that they were able to catch, of people that they were able to find utilizing DOGE. Now, I'm not saying Inspector General doesn't do its job. Inspector General clearly did their job. This happened in 2022 before Elon, before DOGE. This happened when basically Biden was getting into a pissing match with Elon over the great, president of the United States versus the richest person on earth. Heaven forbid they work together and figure out a solution for the American people. But again, you know what I mean? It is what it is. You guys ever think about that? The backstory as to how we got to Elon and Trump? Elon hated Trump. He hated him. Absolutely hated him. You know what I mean? If you ever study that, just take a moment and review how that whole thing came down. Now, with that said, okay, so the bottom line is this. This type of fraud, you're going to be seeing more of it because they're going to be checking to see who's actually alive, who's actually well, what's going on. Now, a lot of these individuals are not over 110 years old. So like the, wow, big news headlines aren't going to happen. But what I want you to remember is every time that we do one of these fraud reviews and explain what happened, I want you to think about what you knew about how they were doing things beforehand and what you knew about our criminal enterprises in this country after we review these actual details. Because, the big thing is this, a lot of people don't realize it, and the worst part of it is, and I saw the protesters again, and they're doing their thing up at the Tesla dealership and stuff like that. The worst part of this is, okay, so if you go to a country like the Middle East, right, where they'll throw things like toxic materials on people's faces, right, acid, whatever. We seem to have a new form of politics that is about trying to scare the disabled and the elderly. And I've become more and more allergic to it. I've become more and more allergic to it. What I've started to realize is that people spend more time trying to complain about what somebody else is doing instead of actually writing up the fix. How many of you have noticed politicians that are capable of writing up bills to be passed for Social Security? So problem number one is that most politicians don't know how Social Security benefits work. A lot of the House reps don't. A lot of the senators don't. They don't know how it works, right? They might, if they're older in the Senate, they might know retirement. If they're younger in the House, they don't know. They don't know. They don't, no clue, right? Unless they're taking care of a parent, and then it's limited knowledge. So if they don't know the program, then the problem you run into is how are they going to write a legal document outlining the changes that they want to see for Social Security benefits? They can't. They can't. That's why they can't fix Social Security benefits. People always complain about, wow, why do we have so many lawyers that are politicians? Well, most of those politicians that are lawyers either have a criminal background or they've dissolved a bunch of companies because they basically, couldn't figure out how to run one. So they thought, you know what, I'll just govern. That's what I'll do. I'll govern the American people. But I guess from my standpoint, the major problem we have with this system is that we have too many people who don't know how to legislate to fix it. And the big issue I see is that in order to keep our fragile class, our disabled and our elderly, our retired, those who are children who are disabled, those who are, spouses that have somebody who passed away, our widows' benefits, in order to protect those individuals, we have to do better. But what people don't tend to ask about is how do we prevent somebody from literally passing away and then getting dragged into a basement, put into a bag, and covered with some sort of antiseptic, antibacterial, antiviral, anti whatever, you know, medium, some sort of liquid to go ahead and preserve the body as much as they can. And what that really comes down to is they just didn't know what to do with the body. You ever think about that? The body sat down there for just under a year. What do you do with the body? That's the weird thing. A lot of you, now I grew up on a farm. We know exactly what to do with the body. Farm people know what to do with bodies because we have livestock. We know what to do with bodies, right? But the average person walking in the home, oh. And think about that. Think about how crazy that is for a moment. Think about that. For a total, she was willing to drag the body of a person into a basement and plastic bag them and then cover them with fluids for essentially over that just under a year period, $7,902. For $8,000, let's say $9,000 plus the SNAP benefits. For $9,000, something that is horrendous beyond imagination was totally fine for this person, Wendy Stone, 63 years old, to commit. Let me ask you this. Was Wendy evil at the beginning? Was she just broken at the beginning? Or is somebody like Wendy Stone existing because our financial economy is literally destroyed? Our capitalism is built to enforce forced labor. So when $9,000 is so enticing to put a body in the basement, you got to think. You just got to take a moment and think. I mean, what would you do for $9,000? Like that goes back to the joke art. Remember those commercials? What would you do for a Klondike bar? Great advertising, right? Same gig, same total and complete understanding with this. What would you do for an extra $9,000? Well, let's say she made it a whole year. What would you do for another, let's just say, 11, 12 grand? What would you do? Would you do this? I don't know. Jack Seymour, thank you for the $20 donation. I super appreciate that. Jack Seymour said, I'm definitely a Republican, but I absolutely love that you stay neutral and informative. Yeah, I try to always stay, because, so there's Republicans and Democrats. I'm in the middle. Sometimes I vote for Republicans. Sometimes I vote for Democrats. You guys know I really like Martin O'Malley as a commissioner of the SSA. I think Commissioner Leland Dudek is really being used as like a quasi pawn by Trump to just effectuate, mass cuts. And that makes him look obviously like he's not a good person for the SSA, but it's the hand behind him is the administration that dictates. So, but I think at the end of the day, it's weird. You guys ever think about what would happen if we abolished the two-party system and there was not allowed to be a DNC or a grand old party? Like, imagine if we abolished it. They were fined to the point where they couldn't exist. They were made illegal so that there could never be organized parties ever in the future. Each candidate was their own candidate. Like, imagine what would happen if we do that. All right. So, what would happen is the billionaires would have to create famous candidates without a party, which means they would lose a lot of strength because those parties wouldn't be used as a platform to make people love that thing. You would just have to make that person a celebrity in and of its own in that person. And the only way to do that is to basically, take your Hollywood, beauty shots, kissing the babe, stuff like that. But then you'd also have to spend more time on the ideology and the theories as to what they stood for. Because remember, if you don't have a Republican or a Democrat party to fall back on, you don't have an automatic base. So, like, let's say somebody stands on this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue, right? So let's say they stand on these issues, but you don't know where they stand on these other things. Well, if they're part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, you don't have to, because you just automatically assume through the halo effect that they're good because you like that party. You get rid of the parties, you abolish them, you ban them. Then the billionaires have to make these people famous by essentially, right, playing. And you ever think about that? Like, okay, let me point something else out to you. And I was thinking about this the other day. Sports teams, right? Like you got NFL, you got baseball, basketball, NHL. You got all these sports teams, right? Have any of you ever thought about what it's like to own a political team? Just think about that. Just think about that. Let's say you have your okay. So guys, you tell me in the chat section, what is your favorite sports team? It doesn't matter if they're Canada or America. Just tell me. Give me an example of your favorite sports team. Give me an example. Anybody give me an example of your favorite sports team, right? Yankees. Cool. Yankees, right? Okay. The let's just call it like it is, the pay to play team. Okay. They obviously buy the best players. Patriots, another great one. Okay. I remember watching Patriots play when I was a kid, eating pizza and eating too much pizza. Steelers, very nice. Guess yours. I'm gonna say the Mighty Ducks. Princess Diana, thank you. And also happy Easter to everybody. Thank you for the $2 donation. That's absolutely amazing. Very, very cool. Miami Hurricanes, Green Bay Packers, Steelers, very cool. So here's like the gig. Okay, Manchester, there you go. Very nice. Classy. So here's the thing. Okay, a billionaire will own a sports team. A billionaire will own a sports team. Okay. Can any of you explain to me how these politicians get so rich so fast? Well, it's because each politician is a sports team. And each sports team requires funding, upkeep, modernization, innovation. They require all that stuff that a traditional sports team would require to successfully operate. So the Clintons are a sports team. The Bushes are a sports team. The Obamas are a sports team. They're all different sports teams, okay? So to be very clear here, if you wanted to go ahead and find out essentially whose sports team is likely to win, you have to see which sports team has the best stats, has the best history, has the most players that are going to be on the field, has the most likelihood that they're reaching a pinnacle point, a high point in their abilities. If you just switch that over to politics, it's okay, are the American people caring about the types of rules and laws that they want passed that politician is promoting? Because if the politician is talking about Social Security and people aren't worried about it, then that's not a politician that's going to win the Stanley Cup or this or that trophy. They're not. They're not going to win it because people have to be interested. Oh my goodness, there's Cowboy comments in there. So Philadelphia Eagles. Oh my goodness. So the point I'm getting at with this, just so you understand it, is that all of our political teams, right? The Trump team, the Biden team, the Biden-Harris team, they're all sports teams. They're all backed by different financial billionaires. They all have different agendas. They all have different logos that they have to present. Okay, except in this case, they're wearing a suit, and what comes out of their mouth as to what's going to pass for law is the logo. So the point that I'm getting at is, if we could, if we really could, you know what I mean? If we really could in this situation, okay, if we could go ahead and get rid of the parties and go back to everybody's their own independent thing, and then we would limit their ability to receive funding, then all we would have left is their idea of how they're going to make our lives better. Why is the focal point of political standing not about specifically what's going to make our lives better? You ever sat back and think about that? It's not about that. What it's about is this rah, 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 right? On the Republican side, it's about freedom. The Democratic side, it's about, civilian rights, basically citizen. Well, actually, right now, it's not about civilian rights. Right now, it's about immigrant rights. That's the big thing for Democrats right now. So, freedom versus immigrant rights. Those are the two things. The Democrats, they use the race card, they use the Social Security card against the Republicans. The Republicans use the, basically financial card. And then I would say also the freedom card against them. Because, the reason Trump got in was very clearly because Bidenomics was the worst I've ever seen since I've been alive. There have been presidents before that were worse than that, but the list is very short. The list is very, very short. Not to mention his cognitive decline. When I saw them promote and prop him up to give the Social Security speech, now you saw somebody who was ready. You saw Martin O'Malley right before Biden got on. Martin O'Malley was click, 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 boom. He was good. He was strong. He was accurate. He's able to deliver the information very quickly. Biden gets on, and it's like I'm watching somebody who can't read a very expensive teleprompter. He couldn't read it. He couldn't deliver a speech. He couldn't do it. How much money did they pay him for that moment? Which political team, which billionaire financer paid to have Biden stand up and do that speech? You know what I mean? Just, the Republicans have the same thing. It's one final thought. And I think this is a very important thought. Have you noticed that on the Democrat side, the billionaires prop up people who are not wealthy, but make them wealthy through their propping up? Whereas on the Republican side, you tend to get billionaires and millionaires who are already wealthy trying to change things and do things. What does that tell you about these two parties? On the Republican side, you have people who want to be the fix, who want to be the named product, who want their name on the thing that goes forward. They want to be Trump, right? They want to be Trump. But the reality is, they believe so much in themselves that they can fix a problem, that they can be the solution, right? That they're willing to not put a buffer in between them and the people. That's how much faith they have that they can be a better solution than what the Democrats offer. Now, the Democrats, who I think the billionaires do a smarter thing, they prop up middlemen, Biden, Harris, to act on their behalf so that when people get pissed at them, right? They can say, well, they didn't like that presidential candidate. They didn't like that vice presidential candidate. They didn't like those people. And the billionaire goes, okay, cool. We've ruined the reputation of that politician and that last name. And now we're going to switch to this group. And now we're going to switch to that group. And so I think one of the important things that you have to consider with this entire situation is that at the end of the day, you have people on the Republican side who truly believe that they can fix something and they're willing to put their name on it. And, that's what killed Trump before. Trump had basically people in the Republican Party, in the Democratic Party, attack him in his first go round, which is why he fired everybody for the most part with his second go round. And what happened was he put his name on it. He did a dumb billionaire thing. He should have had somebody in between him and essentially Biden. He should have had, or, Obama, of course, the transition, but he should have had somebody in. Yeah. Now, the other side of the coin is it's easier to win an election when you're Trump. Trump's everywhere. Name Trump. It's all over the place, right? It's on cups. It's on Beanie Babies. It's all over the place. Okay. I don't actually know if it's on a Beanie Baby. I would assume they have a Trump Beanie Baby. Do they have a Trump Beanie Baby? Let's be very specific with this. Trump Beanie Baby. They got it. Yeah. Trump limited edition Beanie Babies. Yeah. You got teeny ties. Yep. All that jazz. It doesn't have his face and it doesn't have gold hair, but it is a Trump Beanie Baby. Yeah. It's the MAGA baby. So, all right. With that said, please remember to like and subscribe. We only have 228 likes. Hit the button. Give the button a little love because it helps other people understand kind of how this whole thing works. We do have another video directly after this in about 7 to 8 minutes. Please remember to go ahead and also check out Google. Go to Google and type in Disability Resolution Law Firm or Disability Resolution Florida. If you want to, you can throw some stars up there. I always love waking up to those. They keep me inspired. Sometimes it's tough to remain inspired with everything going on because, I work constantly. But with that said, also on Mondays and Thursdays, I normally go live. Unfortunately, as you know, I got the coronavirus, which is why I'm sniffly right now. I'm still pushing my way through it. So what I've decided is I'm going to do one video, and then the next video I'm going to go live and answer questions for free about Social Security disability law, because I haven't been able to do that because the medication I've been on has just made me loopy. With that said, also, if you have a really tough situation, like a tough legal question that takes more than 5 minutes, 7 minutes during that free live session, then there's a mini contract where you can buy a private session, a private hour below. Okay, but remember, that's for like tougher situations, not something I can answer real quick. All right. Although you guys do seem to have quite a few tougher situations, I will tell you, boy, oh boy, the questions I get. If anybody ever asks me, like, what really made you into a really niche, detail-oriented attorney, I would have to say those private sessions, because the things you guys have as issues, holy cannoli. Oh my goodness. I mean, they go deep. They go deep. I mean, we're talking about we're talking about human violation stuff. We're talking about holy cannoli. So anyways, love that. Shirley Robinson Taylor with all the cool little pictures there. I will catch you guys at the next video. Give me about 8 minutes and we will rock and roll from there. And then we will keep going and keep having a good time. I'll catch you soon, Attorney Walter Hnot, and I will catch up with you shortly. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.